Welcome back to the channel. I hope you enjoy. I think there's a person living in my mouth. I inspected my mouth in the mirror, moving it around. I couldn't help but marvel at its smoothness. My jaw brace had made me the laughingstock of school, but now it felt worth it. I smiled wide. I had gotten braces as well, and the results were clear. Sparkling white teeth shined at me. I can hardly believe these are the same yellow crooked teeth I had before. I figured I couldn't look any weirder with the jaw brace and decided to get braces as well. The bug-eyed doctor had said that it would be added free of charge. In fact, in the end, he said that everything would be free of charge. He was awfully kind, but I got goosebumps and a shiver down my spine just thinking about him. He wore black goggles all the time for some reason, and his pale skin combined with the sterile environment made him seem almost inhumane. When I had given him a handshake, his hand was ice cold. I opened my mouth wide. My mouth would have clicked before, but now they opened smoothly. I peered down the back of my throat. I had never been able to open my mouth this wide before. A pair of eyes stared at me. I snapped my mouth shut. Did I just... There's no way. I must be crazy or hallucinating or something. I looked again, but there was nothing. Maybe I was still feeling after effects from the anesthetic or whatever drug was used during the surgery. But then again, that had been weeks ago. I looked one more time just to cool my nerves. It was staring right at me. It was smiling. My sweat ran cold. It seemed to smile wider. A hand blocked out the face, making its way up out of my throat. I dashed backwards, biting my mouth shut. What the hell was that? My breaths were heavy and fast. I hadn't imagined the person. That was real. I clawed at my mouth and dashed back to the mirror. Get out! Get out! I shouted, but there was nothing. When I peered again, there was nobody there. The end. My failure has brought his wrath upon us. My king has always been honest in his predictions. It is not always easy to interpret, nor do I always interpret it correctly, but it always becomes clear in hindsight. Take the stabbings a few years back, for instance. I had visited on the night of a bright hunter's moon, his snow-covered branches reflecting its light. I performed the usual rites and made the necessary sacrifices, and then waited for precisely 8 minutes and 17 seconds. He dropped 7 small flat stones, one by one, at my feet. By this point, I had grown as a listener, and I understood. That night, I made the appropriate wards around my cabin and waited. I've read it in the news exactly a week later. 6 corpses, each a resident of the old town, each found hung upside down with 6 stab wounds and a small ceremonial dagger stuck in their temples. When I went outside that night, as expected, I found a 7th dagger, left abandoned at my doorstep. Delighted that the wards had been successful, I praised his name and took the dagger to be part of the next offering. Then take last year, when I climbed up to his ridge on the night of a vaguely obscured snow moon, revealing the dark silhouettes of the twisted rock formations beyond. After I finished spreading the blood of the night's offerings over his roots, I waited 8 minutes and 17 seconds before massive icicles grew out of every other branch. It saddened me, but knowing it was for the best, I grabbed the icicle nearest to me and made my way back down to the truck where my husband waited. I told him I loved him, and I stabbed him in the neck until the noises stopped, before dragging him back up the ridge and praising his name. Sure enough, exactly a week later, I saw on the news that icicles had rained down on the festival, stabbing through the neck of one person out of each married couple. I thanked him from my heart for his grace and mercy that night. It is because of this consistency that I am still not sure of what to make this year's worm moon. When I made the climb up the canyon to his perch, I was once again in awe of his ghastly silhouette. I performed the rites and made the sacrifices. I waited for precisely 8 minutes and 17 seconds. He then dug 6 branches into the earth, one by one and with violent furiosity. Finally, after I thought I understood, he himself burrowed into the earth and was gone, leaving a small but undeniable earthquake in his wake. He lied to me. 6 was the wrong number. I am so sorry to all of you. When I went up for the pink moon, all there was is the hole he left behind when he left us. It has grown. It is still growing. It will not stop growing. The end. Getting settled in. Mr. Harris was a man of great ambition and little thought. When he set his mind to a goal, he would act as though reality itself would naturally bend to his will. And so when Mr. Harris got bored of Texas and decided he wanted to climb every 14er in Colorado, he didn't take long to find a small house waiting for him in the seemingly even smaller town of Huntington, high up in the Sawatch Range. When he first came knocking at the door, his new friends were puzzled. But before you knew it, they were sharing meals together and even sleeping in the same bed. He settled into the rhythm of Huntington life faster than you'd expect. It was a change of pace for sure, but the taste of the crisp autumn air, his favorite season, and the beauty waiting around every corner more than made up for the slightly off-putting attitudes of his neighbors. The first thing Mr. Harris needed was a job. He decided the local bookshop seemed like a good fit, and when its old owner, Miss Martin, passed and the place went up for sale, Mr. Harris was there to save the day. Business wasn't quite what it used to be, but he'd accomplish his goal soon enough. Next, he decided he needed a good truck. The roads to some of those mountains were rough, and his SUV just wasn't gonna cut it. When young Jim came to drop off the mail one day, Mr. Harris decided his truck was perfect. Jim was hesitant at first, but no one haggles better than Mr. Harris. And soon Jim was the one paying for the honor of his truck going to a man like that. It was a good thing too, because the SUV's brakes failed a week later and Jim's family was never quite the same. Now that everything was in order, Mr. Harris got straight to work on his mountain climbing dreams. Twice a week he'd leave at 3 in the morning, drive off to a new objective, and be back triumphantly before lunchtime. Things went on like this for a long while, and the previously skeptical neighbors seemingly began to warm up to Mr. Harris, never expressing anything but love. As the season went on, 2 mountains down a week, the bookshop chugged along and the mail got delivered later, and frankly less frequently than usual. Old Chet having to double the workload and all that. There was an air of anxiety about Huntington those days, as it was no longer getting the kind of tourism it was used to, and businesses struggled. The Johnson family couldn't afford essential medical care and shrunk. Weeks later, on another gorgeous autumn day, when all this seemed to be reaching its boiling point, Mr. Harris returned from summiting his 85th peak and was ready to head off for some business in Saudi Arabia. With Mr. Harris gone at last, winter was finally allowed to begin. The end. An out-of-place memory. I no longer knew how long we had been on the road. It couldn't have been more than 10 hours or so, given the continued lack of sun, but to my 7-year-old brain it seemed as though the night was infinite. I had slept on and off for most of it, as had my baby brother in the back left seat. We were supposed to be sleeping forever ago, before Dad quietly woke us up and explained we were going on a trip and couldn't tell Mom. He had made it sound like such an exciting thing until the moment the truck was moving away from the house and into the woods. Early on, we passed through forests and mountains, over a couple passes that felt like flying an out-of-control plane in the stars, and then down into the wheat fields. As the following hours passed, almost nothing changed, though eventually the predominant crop was corn, and I remember only because they seemed so alien in the headlights. I don't know where we were that night. I can theorize based on the terrain and remoteness, but the whole night was a blur of dosing in and out, begging Dad to tell us the plan, listening to Cody cry, and slowly being overcome by a dread I didn't understand. There were a couple gas stops, and I remember one of them was filled with intrusive thoughts begging me to run out into the fields and never look back. At the final one, I almost did. Music was never allowed, and for those last hours I felt more connected to the empty night outside than to myself. Dad had essentially shut down since starting the truck, and the few times he did speak, it was his usual growling. Once or twice I thought I saw tears in his eyes, but I could never tell for sure. Then we entered the tunnel. It was one lane and unbearably claustrophobic, and I expected it to last only seconds at first, maybe minutes, but it went on for hours. There were no lights save for those of the truck, and somehow it only got darker over time. I remember finally falling asleep for real, only to wake up somehow a full night's sleep later to pitch black and engine noise. Even Cody had resigned to our fate. When at last a blinding light appeared far in front, seemingly closing in on us. It was followed by rapid crashing from behind, glass shattering, and Dad's blood painting the windshield. Gunshots. The truck swerved and slammed violently into the side of the tunnel. Silence. I woke up in Mom's arms, back home and thinking it was all a dream, only to be told Dad and Cody were gone forever. As a child, my mother would never tell me the truth about that night, and as an adult, I was always too afraid to ask. Now it's too late, and I wish I had. The end. Thanks for taking the time to listen to one of my videos. I'll catch you in the next one. Ciao.